You know that feeling? When you pour everything into a project, you create some serious value, but then you have to fight tooth and nail just to prove what it's all worth? Well, today we are digging into a case study that is all about that. We're going to look at how you connect your hard work to a, get this, massive 284% jump in revenue, especially when you haven't been paid a single cent. This whole story is basically a blueprint for proving your worth, so let's get into it.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll set the scene with this asset that was basically collecting dust. Then, we'll dive into the actual work that was done to fix everything. After that, the fun part, the jaw-dropping numbers. Then, we'll connect the dots between the work and the money. And finally, we'll see how this whole thing exploded into a legal fight.
And really, this is the question at the heart of it all, right? I mean, it's one thing to know in your gut that you made something happen, but it is a whole different ballgame to prove it with cold, hard data. Data that nobody can argue with. And that's what's so cool about this story. It gives us a real-world blueprint for how to do just that.
Okay, so before we can really appreciate the after, we've got to understand the before. Let's paint a picture of what things looked like before anyone rolled up their sleeves and got to work.
So picture this, a valuable music catalog that for decades was just sitting there. It should have been a money-making machine, right? But it wasn't. The income you'd expect, from radio play, TV shows, all that stuff, it was either completely blocked, being sent to the wrong people, or just not getting collected at all. It was like having a Ferrari in the garage with no keys. All this potential just stuck in park.
Okay, so this is where the story pivots. A huge effort gets underway to untangle this mess that's been building for decades. And look, this was not the glamorous high-profile stuff. This was nitty-gritty, detective-level work happening completely behind the scenes.
And when I say nitty-gritty, I mean it. This was super technical. We're not talking about just filing some paperwork. This was hunting down and correcting official registrations with all the big rights organizations. It was about kicking out publishers and admins who had no business being there, who were siphoning off money. It was about solving these tangled ownership fights that were literally putting a stop to any payments. Think of it this way, each one of these fixes was like breaking down a beaver dam on a river, letting the money finally flow where it was supposed to go. Okay, so this is the absolute key. How do we know for sure that this work caused the growth and it wasn't just some random coincidence? It's actually pretty simple. This catalog was dead in the water for years, decades even. And then, the moment this cleanup work began, the money started coming in. It wasn't a gradual thing, it was like flipping a switch.
And that brings us to the really good part, the numbers. Because let me tell you, when you fix these kinds of deep-seated foundational issues, the results can be absolutely explosive. So let's take a look at just how big this impact really was.
284%. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. We are talking about quarterly royalty checks from BMI jumping from about $650 to nearly $2,500. This wasn't some gentle little curve upwards. This was a straight-up rocket launch, and it happened right after the work began.
And you might be thinking, okay, but was that just a one-time fluke? Nope, this wasn't a flash in the pan. If you zoom out and look year over year, the total income from BMI more than doubled. That's a sustained 129% growth. So these fixes didn't just give it a short-term shot in the arm, they fundamentally rewrote the catalog's entire financial future.
And this wasn't just happening with BMI either. For other revenue streams, like SoundExchange, the projections showed at least a 50% jump. And that's the minimum, most conservative estimate you could possibly use. The kind of number you'd feel totally confident defending in court. So even the most cautious look at the data shows a huge, undeniable increase that lines up perfectly with the work that was done.
I mean, this chart right here says it all, doesn't it? Look at that jump. The annual income goes from around $2,700 in 2022 to more than $6,200 in 2023. You don't need a PhD in finance to see what's going on. It's a crystal clear picture of what happens when you finally unlock trapped potential.
So, okay, we've seen the work that was done, and we've seen the incredible numbers. But the million-dollar question is, how do you build an absolutely bulletproof case that one caused the other? Let's walk through the logic.
The first thing anyone's going to say is, well, maybe the entire music market just had a great year, right? But that's not what the data shows. Not at all. There is a crystal clear line in the sand here. Before the work, nothing. Stagnation. After the work, boom, explosive growth. This was not a rising tide lifting all boats. This was one specific boat that got its engine completely rebuilt.
The whole argument really comes down to three simple, powerful facts. 1. Stagnation.
The fact that the catalog was dormant for decades proves this growth wasn't just going to happen on its own. 2. Immediacy. The growth kicked in right after the work started. It's too perfect to be a coincidence. And 3. Opportunity. Suddenly, other people wanted in. Third-party buyout offers started showing up, but only after the catalog was fixed. That's the market telling you that real value had been created.
And this, of course, brings us to the final act of the story. Because when you create this kind of insane value, you'd think getting paid would be the easy part. But what happens when the very agreement that was supposed to get you paid just gets ripped away?
And that's the absolute core of the legal fight. See, all this work wasn't done for an hourly rate. The deal was based on co-ownership, basically a piece of the pie. It wasn't about sending an invoice, it was about having skin in the game. That shared ownership was the only way the person doing all this work was ever going to see a dime.
So when that deal gets broken, it leads to this legal concept called unjust enrichment. And honestly, it's just a fancy term for basic fairness. Think about it. You can't ask someone to restore your classic car, have them make it 10 times more valuable, and then just not pay them while you're driving it around. The law basically says, nope, you can't do that. You've been unfairly enriched at their expense.
And this quote from the legal filings just ties it all together perfectly. It lays it all out. The unpaid work led directly to that 200 to 280% increase, and then the defendants blew up the payment plan while continuing to cash the bigger checks. I mean, it's the whole argument we've been talking about, summed up in one powerful paragraph.
So when you boil it all down, this whole saga comes down to one big question. And it's not just about music royalties, right? This applies to any business, any startup, any project you've ever worked on. When one person's work creates a huge financial win, who really gets to capture that value? Is it the person who put in the sweat or the person who just happened to own the thing to begin with? It's a really important question to think about.